Good morning. I hope all of you are doing good and staying safe. So, we're going to talk about concepts of diseases and natural history of diseases today. Let's start with the concept of disease and etymological triad. I'm sure some of you would have heard this. We'll go through it in a bit of detail. The disease basically is the opposite of health. It is an deviation from a normal functioning or state of a complete physical or mental well-being. It is also defined by Webster as a condition in which body health is impaired, an alteration interrupting the performance of vital functions. Oxford English Dictionary says that it is a condition of the body or an organ of the body in which its function are disrupted or deranged. And Darwin's Medical Dictionary says that any deviation from or interruption of the normal structure or function, any part, organ or system of the body that is manifested by a characteristic set of symptoms and signs and whose etiology and pathology and prognosis may be known or unknown. So comprehensively, if you look at it, this is basically is a deviation or is a temporary or a long-term interruption of either this normal structure or the function, any part, organ or a system of the body. And as Darwin says, it is also manifested by a characteristic set of symptoms and signs, um, which may be symptoms and signs, and the etiology and pathology and prognosis may be known or unknown. So, a classic example for this is COVID, right? So, what happens when COVID or the Corona SARS-CoV-2 virus comes is that there is classic set of symptoms like fever, sore throat, loss of taste, loss of smell, breathlessness, and other symptoms. Signs like there might be interstitial lung disease, there is pneumonia-like stuff, right? Known, the etiology is known that in terms of it is caused by SARS-CoV or COVID-19 virus. And the pathology, it affects the lungs as an interstitial lung disorder. And the prognosis is something that we are not sure yet because there are a lot of people who are asymptomatic, a lot of people who have very mild symptoms, and a lot of people who end up severe infection or death. We do know that some of the people who have some predominantly other comorbidities like cardiovascular disease comorbidities or diabetes, some of these things which actually might have a bad prognosis in the disease. But there are a lot of unknowns still in this particular disease. So that's what a disease is. It is an opposite of health and it sort of forms a complex of interruptions to a structure or part of the structure or functioning of an organ system or part of the body. So when you look at diseases, there are a couple of point of views. One is the ecological point. It says that there is a maladjustment of human organism to the environment. Ecologically, we can say that whenever there is the balance between the humans and the environment is lost, you end up having a disease. There's also a point of view that it's a sociological phenomenon, right? Due to various cultural forces present in the society, social phenomena. Like for example, many diseases, like especially malnutrition, is probably because some of the social phenomena, like people might not have proper food to eat, or people have certain cultural forces which disallows them to eat certain things which are helpful for their growth, or certain cultural practices where people do not want to take any vaccine. These are some of the point of view, ecological, sociological point of view, apart from the biological and the physiological that we really talk about. When you talk about the spectrum of disease, they are either acute in onset, they are insidious in onset, or there is a carrier. So when you talk about acute onset is like whenever, for example, acute diseases like acute respiratory infection. There's an acute flu-like symptom. There's an acute onset. So you'll have running nose, you'll have sore throat, you'll have fever, chills, then acute onset, and then it might lead to certain complications. Serious in onset. This is like it takes a long time to sort of build up. One of the classical examples is filariasis. I don't know how many of you have seen filariasis, but especially in the filariasis belt across the coastal and the west part of the India, like Andhra Pradesh and some parts of Bengal and the coastal belt, where filariasis is pretty common. Uh, Generally, you don't know that this person might end up with filariasis in later part of life, but slowly the microfilaria in the lymphatic system slowly start obstructing. It takes a lot of time for that person to develop elephantiasis. Same thing happens even in HIV. Person might have infection, but he doesn't show symptoms. And by the time he reaches age, it's almost like 8 to 12 years to the acute acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. So he might have HIV infection, but to have AIDS, it might take him anywhere between 8 to 12 years. And there is a carrier state. The classic example, I don't know whether I have talked to you about this or not, but typhoid Mary. This is especially true for typhoid, where this Mary, the cook, was having a carrier state of salmonella within her, and then she was passing on the bug to a lot of people in New York area. So carrier state. So when some people might not show symptoms, might not have the infection, but they carry the organism, which they can shed, which they can give and transmit our various people. Also, when you look at the spectrum of disease, you can see that there is the same organism which can cause many diseases. So you can see that same organism, many diseases like salmonella can cause you typhoid fever, it can cause typhoid, it can cause diabetes. Many diseases can be caused. Same disease, many organisms. This is pretty much true, especially in terms of, let's say, HIV/AIDS. Even though it is because of HIV, there are many organisms which harbor in AIDS patients because acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, like tuberculosis or PCP, like many of the other opportunistic infections which uh, impact the person status from HIV to AIDS. There is a borderline. This is mostly in terms of one of the spectrum is more a borderline. So one of the classical way to think about this is to think about something which is malignant or benign. So there is a borderline between benign and malignant, where many people they get their FNACs or biopsies done, and if it is a borderline, generally they say that okay, you're in the borderline transitioning from benign to malignant, so let's take. Generally, the outcome of the disease is invariable. So, what happens with the disease? Outcome of the disease. So, every person does not respond the same way to the same disease organ. So, there is different outcomes that can happen, and it is variable. That's why we have to think about spectrum of disease. You look at the onset, which is you look at the organism and the disease profile, which is different, and also in terms of outcomes of the disease that can happen, which varies around person to. So, disease is a physiological or a psychological dysfunction. We talked about it, Darlan's Medical Dictionary, Park, Webster, and Oxford, and all. But broadly, it is to say it is a physiological or a psychological dysfunction. Illness basically is a subjective state of the person who feels aware of not being. So, if you have flu-like symptoms, some people might tolerate it well, and they might not feel that they are unwell, but some people might be unwell very initially. So it is basically a subjective state of mind. And also the pain threshold. People have different thresholds of pain. So it is a subjective matter of the person. Sickness is basically, illness is a subjective state of the person who feels of not being well. And sickness is a state of social dysfunction. So, disease, physiological or psychological, illness is subjective state of mind of the person. Sickness is basically a social dysfunction. The reason why sickness is a social dysfunction because whenever there is sickness, there is an amount of social dysfunction that happens, and this is termed as sickness. So when you talk about this sickness, one of the classical way to talk about is sickness absenteeism. Right? The person might have a disease because of which he might have a subject to state awareness saying it is ill. And sickness is a social dysfunction. That means that he cannot come to work, right? So that's what sickness is. The concept of causation. There are a lot of historical views. What causes the disease? They say that there is some divine visitation is historically talked about. And there is something called as humoral imbalance. Imbalance within the internal body environment causes the disease. And Fracastoro said that is a contagion theory. So there is something which is a disease which contaminates then further causes it. Germ theory is again one more thing which Louis Pasteur said. He said there is a one-to-one relationship between disease and the disease. That there is a virus which causes it, or there is a bacteria which causes fungus, or there is a plasmodium which causes it. However, this is true only for germ theory. Non-germ theories, like, non-germ diseases like non-communicable diseases, not something which is so direct relationship. There is no disease agent for hypertension. There is no disease agent for diabetes. There is no disease agent for cardiovascular. So it basically is a bit more difficult to explain non-communicable diseases. Communicable diseases, germ theory fits it. So you basically have germs which cause infection. Infection causes symptoms, and infection can also cause course of the disease. Then there might be treatment, vaccination, antibiotics where the person recovers and might recover and then get back germs again and then get infected, or he might not get treated or the vaccination or antibiotics don't work. So it continues with the infection. So this whole cycle of one-to-one relationship is something that the germ theory by Louis Pasteur, especially in terms of the concept of the most valid, I would say, the concept of the disease according to the scientific understanding and follow. There is also multifactorial causation. This is pretty much true, especially when it comes to your non-communicable diseases. Okay? So, socioeconomic, cultural, genetic, and psychological. Let's take up cardiovascular. Socioeconomic conditions. Previously, it was thought that the people who had higher socioeconomic status used to eat a lot of junk food and a lot of food which is heavy in trans fats. So, socioeconomic condition was linked with cardiovascular. But nowadays, it's another line is blurring. Cultural. A lot of cultural things in terms of not giving cholesterol to the children, not giving proper vaccination. Things like that. Or culturally, we eat a lot of salt, especially in pills and all. Genetic. There is genetic preponderance, especially for people who have hypertension or diabetes. There is a preponderance of genetic transmission. And then there is psychological. Psychologically, if there is stress or something, then hypertension increases. The stress causes hypertension, or it can even lead to diabetes. So all these factors together contribute to something like a coronary heart disease. So this is multifactorial causation. Not like a germ theory where you have one agent which is leading to the disease, but here there are multiple factors which play. So, for example, coronary heart diseases, you have hypertension is a factor, excess fat intake or trans fat, smoking, lack of physical exercise. All these things basically combinedly cause something like the coronary heart disease, or cardiovascular. This is multifactorial. So look at this in terms of web of causation, especially by McMahon and Pugh. Uh, so when you look at the lifestyle, one of the lifestyles is smoking, and lifestyle obesity. The higher the obesity, you have hyperlipidemia, which can lead to atherosclerosis. Smoking can directly lead to coronary occlusion, and then stress can lead to smoking, and then can lead to coronary occlusion. Stress can also lead to emotional disturbance, hypertension, in the artery, which can again lead to coronary occlusion. Aging can also lead to hypertension. So there are multiple factors. So lifestyle has both smoking, obesity, stress, emotional disturbances, aging comes into the picture. There's coronary atherosclerosis, there is change in arteries, there is a coronary occlusion which is happening, which is finally leading to myocardial. There are so many factors. If you want me to list down the factors, everything is a factor. Lifestyle is a factor. Obesity is a factor. Hyperlipidemia is a factor. Maybe atherosclerosis is a factor. Smoking is a factor. Stress is a factor. Emotional disturbance is a factor. Hypertension is a factor. Change in heart rate is a factor. Aging is a factor. Apart from this, you can add even some of the practices of consumption of food like pickles, high salt, papas, and stuff like that. That also comes in. Yeah, all these things is basically a web of cause. So there's no one single causation like the germ theory, like one agent that we use. This is web of causation. Remember that web of causation is one of the exam questions for most. Web of causation is there are multiple factors or multifactorial causes. All these factors play a role towards causation of one particular value. This is a classic example. Now coming to epidemiological triad. What is epidemiological triad? Triad is three. So whenever we talk about the molecular triad, it's basically we talk about three things: agent, host, and environment. This triangle is something that you should remember. Remember agent, host, and environment. When these three are in equilibrium or they are in a state of equilibrium, nothing happens. Whenever the state disrupts, something happens. So agent factors. So basically when we talk about agent factors, we're talking about biological agents, we're talking about nutrient agents, chemical agents, biological agents, social agents, cultural agents. There are lots of agents. Broadly, in biological, you can talk about infectivity, pathogenicity, and virulence. For example, COVID, highly infectious, right? Because it infects the R naught, that is the reproductive number of this particular COVID-19 disease, anywhere between 3, 4. So for every one person can spread to 2 to 3. So it's highly infectious. Pathogenicity. The moment you get a disease, pathogenicity is not so virulent, but almost 60% to 70% are mild or asymptomatic. Only 20 to 30% becomes moderately severe. Only around 3 to 5% people who get the disease actually die, based on the numbers that we have currently. The virulence is basically the measure in terms of how the disease basically impacts mortality. So currently at this point of time we can say COVID has a higher virulence in terms of the flu-like symptoms and everything, but there's still a lot of information that we still need to know in terms of whether it is highly virulent. Nutrient agents, so malnutrition. So if you basically don't have proper protein intake, then you have a problem of protein intake. You have higher fat intake, then you have cardiovascular. Higher carbohydrate intake, then you have diabetes-like conditions. Higher alcohol intake, that is again another problem for liver disease. Right? So the nutrient agents. Physical agents can be in terms of temperature, can be in terms of chemical agents can be in terms of endogenous or exogenous. So something which is internal is endogenous, exogenous. So many times endogenous like fluorosis, endogenously chemical agent. Exogenous when you come in contact with some of the chemicals. The recent thing in terms of the Vizag gas leak, the exogenous chemical agent, which actually caused problem and some people died with it. Mechanical agents. This is again crushing or the road traffic accidents is one of the mechanical agents. High impact, high speed impact, and there is cause of mortality. Social agents, multiple social. We thought about host factors. This is something that you have to remember about in terms of host factors. Even though the agents are there, the host factors also play a role. So demographically, you have age, sex, ethnicity. Ethnicity doesn't play much of a role in India because we don't have highly varied ethnicity. Countries in like United States, Canada, many of the Eastern and Western Europe countries, ethnicity plays a role. Biologically, again, you have genetic, biochemical, and immunological parameters within the body of a person. Some of them actually, even though they are exposed to certain, let's say, for smoking or something like that, they still don't get cancer. Some of them get it. So we don't know what is actually happening in terms of genetic or biochemical related issues happening. And especially in COVID, we don't know how the immunological reaction to the COVID is happening. So we are still unsure whether Once you get COVID, are you protected for your life? The immunity is for life or not? Or how much the antibodies are generated, and are the antibodies effective enough against the virus, and all those things. Are still a lot of questions which are supposed to be addressed. Social and economic, a lot of social and economic. So, for example, social, if you talk about the various uh, diseases that are there, many, for example, if I can talk about some of the social factors, one of the super spreaders that have happened, especially with the COVID-19 outbreak, if you see, has been from one of the group of people from some of them where they attended a religious meeting. So this is social meeting. Here they were meeting, this year also they met. But unfortunately, what happened? The virus was there, and because of it, the social related gathering which was there then started becoming. A lot of people started becoming infected with it. Economic, we can again see a classic example of tuberculosis, which is if there is what we call overcrowding, then tuberculosis becomes increased. So the people who have less socio-economic status or who are poor, there's probably a lot of overcrowding and which might lead. At the same time, if you have low socio-economic status, then your access to food and nutrients is less. Lifestyle. This is another thing that is coming up over the last 1 or 2 decades, where we are seeing that the type of lifestyle that all of us are leading, especially in terms of highly stressful, sedentary, lot of different types of foods that we are eating, obesity, in terms of stress, in terms of consumption of alcohol, smoking. These are all basically lifestyle which again play a role in terms of the imbalance for the agent host and environment. Environment, there is again physical, biological, and psychosocial environment. These are again the environmental related factors which come into the picture. So, not just in terms of physical, biological, and psychosocial, what we're seeing now is especially in biological, zoonotic transmission. COVID probably is being thought that it is being genetically transmitted from bats to humans. Right? So that the more and more the species are intermingling within themselves, more and more chances of environment getting equilibrium getting disrupted. The physical, biological, and psychosocial factors. So this is about the epidemiological triad and the concept of health, or concept basically of disease, where we talked about the various. Now let's talk about natural history of disease. So as we discussed, any deviation from normal functioning and state of physical and mental well-being of the disease, and this is from a complex interaction between man agent and environment, or the host agent and environment. So remember that it's a complex interaction between agent, host, and epidemiological triad, complex triad, where many factors interplay between each other. So natural history of disease basically is evolution of disease over time from the earliest stage of its pre-pathogenesis phase to its termination as recovery, disability, or death in the absence of treatment or prevention. This is the natural history. Every disease has a pre-pathogenesis phase, then it goes into symptomatic phase, then there is a recovery with either full recovery or disability or death, especially in the absence of treatment or prevention. The development of effective disease prevention and treatment programs depend upon understanding natural history. Each disease has a unique history. And epidemiology helps in understanding the natural history of disease. Basically, the key concept within epidemiology. Natural history of disease is the key concept because each disease has its own uniqueness. The epidemiologists study disease patterns in the communities in relation to the agent, host, and environment. And what the physician sees in the hospital is just an episode in the natural history of the disease. Remember that what as a epidemiologist or as a natural history of disease, there is a host of activities that are happening. But a clinician or a physician only sees a small episode within the. So you have to understand that clinician is only a part observer to a part of an episode of the natural history of disease. There is something which has happened before, and there will be something that after that. So causative factors of the disease. We talked about agent, host, and environment, and whenever there is an interaction of these three factors, and whenever there is an imbalance because of it, that is what is essential to initiate the disease process. So causative factors of a disease generally fall into either one of these three: agent, host. So whenever you think of a disease, you think of the disease in three parts: agent, host, and environment. And then within those things, then you can start writing up in terms of what probably can be the causative factor of the disease. The natural history of disease consists of two phases. One is the pre-pathogenesis and the pathogenesis. Before the pathogenesis starts occurring and the pathogenesis. The pre-pathogenesis phase is preliminary to the onset of the disease. There is no entry of the agent into the man yet. Factors that favor its interaction with the host are present. Man is in the midst of the disease. For COVID-19, I have not got COVID-19 yet. I have not got, probably. So the period of the preliminary to the onset of the disease, no entry of the agent into the man. The agent has not even. Factors that favor its interaction with the host of the disease. So if I go out without a mask, if I go into a large gatherings, if I go and if the schools and cinema halls and malls are open, if I go, then there are a lot of factors of interaction that happen. Man is basically in the midst of the disease. This is where the pre-pathogenesis phase is. The pathogenesis phase basically depends upon the immunity of the host and pathogenicity of the agent. So that's what I was saying. Most of the people who are exposed to COVID don't end up getting COVID. Those people who end up getting COVID, also 60 to 80% of them are either mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. Only 20 to 30% of the people are actually who are too severe or moderately disease. Entry of the disease agent, so once it depends on the immunity. First is the immunity within the host, right? And the pathogenicity of the agent. And the agent is so pathogenic, then the immunity doesn't play. So once, based on the immunity, the entry of the disease agent in the susceptible human host, the agent then multiplies and it is killed. Few on physiological changes happen. Then there is early pathogenesis, then there is late pathogenesis, and there is recovery, disability, or death. This is how, in general, all the diseases. So entry of the disease agent into the host, and then the agent multiplies within the host. Then there is a physiological changes. Then there is early pathogenesis. Then there is a late pathogenesis. The incubation. Agent incubates to acquire the critical density to initiate this. One particular virus of COVID enters my body, nothing but that COVID virus starts replicating. It has to acquire a critical density to initiate the disease. So it multiplies or increases in intensity for a specific period before becoming overt. Disease initiation is at the cellular level. Three cause the agent becomes sufficient, complemented by its causal partner. So it starts working on the cell. So complemented by its causal partners, because look at COVID, it's not just the agent. People who actually end up having severe disease are already having some of the other comorbidities. That is a partner in the causal partner. So the clinical horizon. We talk about clinical horizon, there is signs and symptoms. So what happens is there is illness, which can lead to recovery, chronic disability, or death. This phase may be modified by intervention, like immunization. This is where a clinician generally comes in. So once there is a signs and symptoms of a particular disease starts occurring, then there is this realization of the subjective realization of the person that he is sick. So once this illness subjective realization comes, that's when a physician or a clinician comes to the picture, and that's where the whole thing in terms of chemotherapy, medicine, supportive therapy, everything. But certain infections may be clinical or certain infections may be subclinical. So many times you don't even know that you have the disease. That's why I was saying, stressing again and again that there are a lot of these asymptomatic people of COVID. They don't even know that they have disease and they don't even know that they have any of the symptoms. They don't even have those symptoms. But the virus is replicating within their body. They are infected. So infection may be clinical or subclinical. The natural history of the disease. For hepatitis B is one example that has been set up. I have put this up from the part. So if you look at it, initially there is an exposure to acute hepatitis. So hepatitis B agent. So initially there is an acute hepatitis B infection. 66% of them they have jaundice like and flu like. 33% they have subclinical infection or asymptomatic. Within this, what happens is 0.4% is pulmonary, but the rest of them get inside into a chronic carrier. Subclinical information 85 to 90% is chronic carrier. Now, within the chronic carrier state, 10 to 30% develop chronic hepatitis, 70 to 90% minimum liver disease. Sometimes the minimal liver disease also gets reactivated and gets into chronic hepatitis. And this chronic hepatitis or minimal liver disease for a longer time can lead to primary liver cancer or cirrhosis, which both of them lead to death. But then, if you look at subclinical or clinical jaundice, 5 to 10% only get into the chronic cancer. 85 to 90% quickly recovery. If you actually look at it, out of the people who are exposed to hepatitis B, there might be only 5 to 10% who get into chronic carrier state and around 0.5% who fulminate. So there is something that is playing a role. There are a lot of other things that are playing a role here, which there is environment, there is agent, there is host, a lot of factors which play a role, and we see that 85 to 90% actually recover with immunity. In chronic diseases like coronary heart disease, hypertension, and cancer, the early pathogenesis phase is less dramatic. No manifestation. Don't even know. There's something called as a pre-symptomatic phase. You don't even know that the person has cancer, the person has cardiac disease, hypertension, diabetes. Clinical stage begins when the three signs: pre-symptomatic phase, unsymptomatic. By the time he presents to the doctor, the disease is already well advanced. To the late pathogenesis. This is what I wanted to emphasize, that pre-pathogenesis phase, it is the environment which plays a role. In the pathogenetic phase, there is a pre-symptomatic phase, and pre-symptomatic phase is very critical, and many times in many diseases we don't have any clue that there is a pre-symptomatic phase of that particular disease happening, and by the time the symptoms arise, it's already well advanced. So when you look at it, natural history of disease, period of pre-pathogenesis and period of pathogenesis. So if you look at pre-pathogenesis, before the man is involved, there's a lot of this agent, host, and environment factors interactions. When then there is a human host, there is an interaction of host and stimulus starts happening. There's a host reaction, which leads to an early pathogenesis, leads to an lesion, which leads to an advanced disease, and it leads to convalescence or further immunity. So many times what happens is, once it enters the human host, once the disease pathogenesis starts in the human host, stimulus or agent becomes established and increases of multiplication, the tissue and physiological changes. Then there is a line which is called as clinical horizon. So below the clinical horizon, there is a lot of this asymptomatic phase. Once the clinical horizon threshold is met, that's when your signs. Once you have a signs and symptoms, then you lead to illness, disability, defect, or death. Or sometimes from illness you have a recovery and you go. So that's how it is mostly in terms of the natural history. And this slide also gives you a very quick understanding in terms of levels of prevention. So in the pre-pathogenesis phase, generally we work on the risk factors. Early diagnosis, treatment is secondary prevention. Tertiary prevention is once the illness sets in, so you look at disability reduction and treatment. So when you look at the modes of intervention, for primary prevention it is mostly health promotion and specific protection. For secondary prevention it is early diagnosis and treatment. For tertiary prevention it is disability limitation and rehabilitation. So this particular picture, if you remember, and if you see, you can understand the complete natural history of the disease and also the levels of prevention and modes of intervention. So this is again another thing that I wanted to sort of quickly tell you about the natural history. So there is an infection and there is a no infection in the course of time. So there is a susceptible host. Either he can get infected or he doesn't get infected. If so a susceptible host will only get infected if he has an exposure. That does not mean that he will always get infected if he has an exposure. He might get no infection or he might get infection. If he gets infection, then there is a time lag before he develops a clinical disease. And in the clinical disease, either it is the death or recovery. In the clinical disease, that's where the onset of symptoms. So when you look at it, from the exposed time to the appearance of symptoms, this is called as incubation. Whereas from the exposed time to the level of infection that is happening, but not in terms of clinical disease. So you should have the infection but not develop the symptom. That is called as latent phase. So this is latent phase is very common, especially for chronic disease. So they develop the disease, but by the time they develop the symptoms, it is too long. For example, hypertension they were developed some years back, but we don't know. Actually, the hypertension is there, but you don't know. So, from the time of exposed to the infection, like HIV, forget hypertension. Yeah. The person might have got HIV, but by the time he developed the clinical disease, it's called as incubation period. But from the exposure to the level of infection, from the time he is infected, that is called as latent. And then there is something called as infectious period. For COVID-19, infectious period is like whenever the person has the development, has the infection within him and produces enough virus so that it can infect. The infectious disease can be a part, it is a part of the incubation period and also a part of the clinical phase of it. Many people are infectious in the incubation period and also in the clinical disease. This is about the natural, and then there is non-infectious. So once the infectious stage is over, there is non-infectious. That's what I wanted to sort of give you a brief overview of the natural history of disease and also concept. This is more to give you an understanding that things are not straightforward. There are multiple factors. There are multiple ways that people respond. There are multiple ways that the infection happens. Remember that there is web of causation. Remember that there is pre-pathogenesis and pathogenesis stage. Remember that there are different levels of prevention, modes of prevention. Remember that there is an incubation period, latent period, infectious period, and non-infectious. These are some of the key things that I would emphasize that all of you should keep it in mind and try to sort of remember. So that's all from me for today. I hope all of you have safe stay and all of you stay safe. Thank you. Take care.